You're listening to Dateline Latin America, Tear Gas and Tango with
Joe Goldman, 37 years with ABC News, then with UPI, with The Village Voice, and many other.
And me, Daniel Schweimler, originally from London, formerly of the BBC, 19 years, and more recently with Al Jazeera English across Latin America.
They'll be sitting at a kitchen table in Buenos Aires talking about their journalistic adventures across the region, covering earthquakes, flooding and fires, talking to presidents, charlatans, sports stars and other newsmakers. In short, journalism and the state of the world.
Good afternoon, Daniel Schweimler.
Hi, Joe Goldman. Thank you very much. It's a wet and windy day here in Buenos Aires.
But as I was coming into your lovely abode, there was the sun breaking out and a huge, huge rainbow over Vicente Lopez, where we're recording this from. So there is hope for the future.
Always hope for Argentina, I think, despite its many problems. But what about Brazil? Is there hope for Brazil?
Today is an important day because today is the day that the tariffs that Trump has imposed on Brazil come into effect, August 1st, as we're recording this. It's an interesting tariff because experts will say that it actually will hurt the U.S. more than it will hurt Brazil.
Because Trump came out a few weeks ago and said it has to impose tariffs because there's a trade surplus with Brazil. And it's not true. I mean, the United States sells more to Brazil than Brazil sells to the United States.
Absolutely.
So the losers will be the United States. I mean, interesting that the tariffs, 50% tariffs on many things, it was going to be 10%, wasn't it? But there are some exemptions, aircraft, timber, of which Brazil has a lot, and oil. And interestingly, orange juice is exempt from the tariffs. Why orange juice?
Trump does not like California. I think that is the biggest explanation. And he also has a up and down affair with Florida, another big orange producer. So that may be why.
Okay, yeah. And it was going to be a 10% tariff on many Brazilian items. And at the last minute, or the last few days, the United States has decided to apply 50%, far more than almost any other country in the world, because the United States is interfering in the Brazilian judicial process, and they've sanctioned the judge, hasn't he? A Supreme Court judge, Alexandre de Moraes, who has accused the former president, Jair Bolsonaro, being involved in a coup attempt in Brazil at the beginning of 2023. So remarkable.
It's unbelievable. And, you know, much like the United States, January 6th, this was January 8th, 2 days and a year after. Much like that, we all watched as this unfolded on television. We saw it happening, and now it's almost like being denied, just like they are denying January 6th in the U.S. It's bizarre to me.
And remarkably similar, wasn't it? It was Jair Bolsonaro supporters. He'd just lost the elections to the former president, Lula da Silva, left-wing president. And his supporters turned up in Brasilia and ransacked the Supreme Court, the Congress building, the presidential palace, in the same way that Trump supporters did in DC a year earlier. Remarkably similar.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't get to cover that. I don't know if you were covering that from. We had somebody in Brazil who was covering that day.
We did as well. No, didn't cover the ransacking. No,
But
no.
just watching the images, we know Brasilia. Brasilia is this amazing city, like it or not, this modernist city built in the middle of nowhere with the Neymar imprint, the amazing architect of Brazil. And you were watching this, and there was this kind of dystopian image as they ransacked some of what's the amazing cultural heritage of Brazil.
I mean, you say middle of nowhere. It really is the middle of nowhere. It's difficult to get to Brasilia from the rest of Brazil. So any mass demonstration, it's unlikely to be residents of Brasilia who are taking part in the protests. So you have to get them there. And that's no easy. I mean, either fly them in, which is expensive, or you go by bus, which takes hours, days even. So it has to be well organized. And you also say, like it or not, I really dislike Brasilia as a city. It's soulless. It's designed for traffic only. It's a difficult place to walk around. And you've got that big plaza in front of the Supreme Court by the Congress. It's boiling hot, and there's no trees there. So any demonstrations, you're there in the blazing sun.
It's a really weird place. I happen to like it just because I think the design is so wacko. It's just unlike any other city. And what it's created, I did a long story in Goiânia, which is about an hour and a half west of Brasilia. And I've never even heard of Goiânia before being sent to do this story there. And Goiânia has over 1 million people. And it had nobody, I mean, nobody. It had like 8,000 people before Brasilia existed. So it's one of those offshoots that Brazil created by putting their capital on the map in the middle of the country.
Most of the people who work there are government workers, or there's people who feed the government workers, the hotel industry, the restaurant industry. There's no very little in the way of natural industry in Brasilia itself. And I always wonder whether it's truly representative of the country. It's so far from the centers of population, so far away from Sao Paulo, so far away from Rio de Janeiro. And at the weekend, you go to the airport on a Friday afternoon, all the lawmakers, the congressmen,
all of them,
they're all going home. So there's nobody there.
Oh. So if you go to a club on the weekend, you will see the people from Brasilia.
So you just do wonder, is it truly representative of the rest of the country? Because most people in Brazil have never been to Brasilia because it's so far away. Most British people have been to London. Many Americans have been to Washington, D.C. It's a strangely non-representative, I find, of the rest of the country.
Yeah, obviously it was a place where violent rioters felt very comfortable going and ransacking the place. And it's amazing that Trump not only supported and pardoned the January 6th rioters, but he's trying to do the same in another country with similar rioters.
The big difference, I think, is that in the United States, after the riots there, Biden and the Democrats didn't really go after Trump and his supporters. It was a very vague, wishy-washy, namby-pamby sort of response. The big difference in Brazil, Lula, who took the presidency around the time of the riots, has gone after, he would say he hasn't, the judicial system, the judges, the system has gone after the rioters, and it has implicated the former president, Jair Bolsonaro, him and some military officers and other people. That is the big difference, I think, between what happened in the US and Brazil.
Having done a couple of stories in Brazil that involved the Supreme Court, quite a few years ago, I saw the workings of the Brazilian justice system, and certainly it is a justice system that is head and shoulders above Argentina's justice system. I would say it's in line with Uruguay and Chile in many ways, where it's a system that really is free from. I don't think Lula da Silva was involved really in any pushing of the justice system to go after Bolsonaro. Look, in the U.S., there was nothing done from the Justice Department to really go after Trump, and really the justice system failed in many ways. I take that back. The justice system put 1,000 guys in jail. The pardons came, and there was no way to go around that. So the fact that they were available for pardons made it unjust.
Right. I mean, the Brazilian justice system took a bit of a pounding when Bolsonaro was in the presidency, and they started going after the previous president, Lula, who had been president from, I think, 2003 to 2010, on charges of corruption. And the judge who went after him, Sergio Moro, after finding Lula guilty, putting him in prison for 500 and something days. I look very closely at the corruption charges against him, that he took money from Petrobras, the big Brazilian oil company, to renovate his beach house, on the coast near to Sao Paulo, and another apartment. Very flimsy. I never saw the evidence there. There were accusations. They found him guilty. He went to prison in Curitiba. I did cover that. We were following him around the country to find out where they were going to imprison him. Huge support when he went in. People came out in their thousands in Sao Paulo, his kind of homeland, his power base, and supported him there. But he spent this time in prison watching his football and, planning for the future when he was eventually, the charges were overthrown. And then Moro, the judge who put him in prison, became the justice minister under Bolsonaro. So,
and you can say also that I think what I'm talking about is the final stop, the Supreme Court, where the Supreme Court in the U.S. has become a rubber stamp for Donald Trump. The Supreme Court has not been that for Bolsonaro at any moment in time. So when lower courts went after Lula, when it finally arrived to the Supreme Court, it was overturned. So I think that's the important thing, to feel like you have a place of final resolve that will be handing out justice.
Many Brazilians do respect their justice system. So when the president of the United States starts accusing them of a witch hunt, and Lula being behind the accusations against Bolsonaro, plenty of Lula supporters are obviously outraged, but also lots of right-wing Brazilians can't believe that their sovereignty is being challenged in this way by their big, powerful neighbor to the north.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're seeing it in other countries too. I believe you know more about the Colombia situation. There's been a bit of meddling by the Trump administration in Colombia.
Yeah, well, the former president there, right-wing president Alvaro Uribe, was found guilty a while ago of receiving bribes from right-wing paramilitaries who he was trying to silence, about his connection with these paramilitary groups. And he was sentenced just a few hours ago to 12 years in prison for receiving bribes and for political corruption. And the U.S. Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, has said he's accused the Colombian authorities of a witch hunt against their former ally in Colombia. Again, two left-wing presidents, Gustavo Petro in Colombia, Lula da Silva in Brazil, neither of them allies of the Trump regime. So the U.S. really meddling in the affairs of these two countries, potential allies, previous allies, very strong allies in the region. But it seems likely to backfire, certainly in Brazil, because people are so outraged about the meddling.
Well, for now, in Colombia, it's been meddling simply with the justice system. In Brazil, it's also meddling with the trade system. 50% tariffs. We'll have to see what Brazil does with the tariffs. Are they going to put tariffs on all U.S. products? I don't know.
I think it's going to be a reciprocal. Brazil is a big enough, powerful. Not as powerful as the United States, but I think it's a big enough, powerful enough country to be able to fight back. He sees it as bullying.
There are certain products that Brazil has said that they would go outside of that and put under the scope of their reciprocal arrangement. Specifically looking at, I believe you had certain technological, computers, certain things that they were looking, to go after U.S. That would hurt the U.S. certainly.
Brazil has already stood up to bullies in the form of Elon Musk and an X or Twitter, whatever you want to call, on Elon Musk, fighting back against their kind of measures that they were trying to impose on Brazil. And again, judges in Brazil said, we're not going to put up with this. And they stood their ground.
They were able to win that battle. Brazil is not a pushover. You can certainly say that a country like Argentina is being a pushover at this point. We're having an influx of U.S. visitors. Kristi Noem, the director of Homeland Security, was in Buenos Aires this week. Mostly, she showed up at a couple of government functions, but she wanted to go out into the campo, into the countryside, to ride horses. hopefully she didn't shoot any goats or dogs.
She has a record, doesn't she, of
She
shooting?
does,
Yeah.
yeah. She said that her pet dog was being a bit overbearing, violent, so she went out back and shot her dog, and she bragged about it in her book. I don't know if our president, who claims to have 5 dogs, showed her the dogs. I would hope not. But anyway, she's come through here. We've had other luminaries from the Trump administration pass through in the last few months also.
I mean, we've got like a kind of triangle of visitors coming up in our, 'cause Trump obviously, or his people, and there's talk of Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, coming here in September. I'm not sure the Israeli government has confirmed that yet, but so you've got these three presidents, Milei, or prime ministers, Milei, Netanyahu, and Trump, visiting one another. I mean, Netanyahu, there's orders against him for his arrest out in several countries. It'll be interesting to see what happens there. He won't be going to Brazil, that's for sure. I don't think Lula would welcome him in Brazil
Chile
at the moment.
Also, with a huge Palestinian population, I don't think he's going to go anywhere near Chile. I would say this is podcast number 8 that we're doing. If you look back at number 6, we were doing the Amia bombing. And it's something to think about. If Netanyahu visits, will Argentina be a target again? Once again, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago. As you go through Buenos Aires, you will see added security at Jewish schools, synagogues, remembering Argentina has one of the largest Jewish populations outside of Israel, about 200,000 Jews, and they're mainly in Buenos Aires. Will a Netanyahu visit bolster some of these terrorists to once again do what they did twice in the 90s?
I suspect that the Israeli authorities are weighing up the options at the moment. As I say, not being confirmed, but it's something Malay would very much like. I mean, he can't go and visit his neighbors at the moment. He's been to Brazil. He didn't call in on Lula. There's very few places these presidents can go and visit and get a warm welcome these days.
Not an easy task. I would say that I've been pretty impressed with the way Chile is dealing with things in the midst of this situation. They've been quite good at keeping relations with the United States, but also keeping relations with China, with others. There's this implicit threat of the U.S. to countries who have any kind of dealings with China. We can see that in Ecuador, for example. Ecuador has done a tremendous amount of trade and also deals with the Chinese, especially in mining and in oil and gas. And they have cut back on that due to pressure from the Trump administration.
Well, the other one, the kind of backdoor kind of move by the United States, it seems, there was going to be a Taiwanese entourage coming to Paraguay. Paraguay, one of the few countries, I think 12 countries in the world that Taiwan still has diplomatic relations with. Small islands in the Caribbean, and Paraguay being one of them. I think 7 of those countries are in Latin America and the Caribbean. And they were scheduled to do a stopover in the United States, and that permission, it seems, was withdrawn. So the Taiwanese delegation isn't going to make it to Paraguay. So there has been some, deals done, it seems, or quiet words in the back corridors about not letting the Taiwanese make it to South America.
And the other big deal that the Chinese have in South America is they've opened a port about 2 hours north of Lima. That is one of the largest ports and most modern port facilities in the region. China supported that. They have a huge part of the product that goes out goes to China, but not necessarily. And the U.S. has been livid about that.
But it's always been the big difference, hasn't it, between, both the United States and China, and during the Cold War, the Soviet Union. were very keen to have an influence, have power and influence in Latin America. And the US way was always to get involved politically, to make sure it had right-wing allies in, Pinochet in Chile, the military regime here in Argentina, Stroessner in Paraguay, sympathetic regimes in Colombia. Everywhere, yeah, the Duvaliers and Somoza, some horrendous leaders. They may be son of a bitches, but at least they're our son of a bitches. Somebody in the US said at one stage, and that, yeah, about Somoza, that was very much the case. Yet the Chinese, they've been in Latin America for some time now, not being overtly involved in politics, but massive investment. Yeah, the port you've just mentioned, the Rosario, which is the biggest port in Argentina, investment there. So it's infrastructure. So the Chinese from the 60s, 50s, 60s onwards have been coming to Latin America, investing in infrastructure, not always providing jobs, but, providing investment in the region.
Absolutely.
And that has won friends. And even during the pandemic, the two countries that came in with the vaccines were Russia with its Sputnik, which I had because there were no American or European vaccinations available at the time. So my only choice at the beginning of the pandemic was the Sputnik vaccine, and then the Chinese. And there was a lot of misinformation about how unreliable these vaccines were. But the two countries, yes, they were trying to help the population. There was obviously always an ulterior motive, try to win hearts and minds at the same time.
I hate to say it, but there's a word here that I think is out of the U.S. vocabulary these days. It's called diplomacy. And that's what's happening. China also has invested in places like Nicaragua with Daniel Ortega, who's absolutely loony bin. They were investing in Stroessner also secretly. They've been investing in other right-wing governments. They don't pull that out of their hat and make it like a big deal. They just do the trade deals.
Yeah. I mean, very quietly involved in Cuba. I mean, keeping Cuba afloat after the Soviet Union and the Russians pulled out in the kind of the early 90s. I mean, Cuba's been in a terrible financial state pretty much ever since. But the Chinese have always been there or thereabouts.
Yeah.
The buses are Chinese. The main school, the Spanish-speaking school for Chinese diplomats is in Cuba. There's all sorts of investment there. I mean, the figures don't make sense, and you would see Cuba on the brink of collapse. There'd be a visit by some minor Chinese minister, and then things seem to kind of pick up again. There was always something going on there. Again, it was never open, it was never easy to read, but the Chinese have been there. I mean, Cuba is so close to the United States, a thorn in its side. It's in China's interests. They're probably not as overt as the Soviets were, with their missiles pointing at the United States. And you do see little bits of evidence of their involvement there.
We can talk about Argentina, where Milei, when he was campaigning and in his first month or two, screamed about China. We're not going to do deals with communists. We're not going to be, there needed deals with, China was the number one trade partner of Argentina. They couldn't get out of that. And they also needed the cash swaps that were being done. China was doing a bunch of cash swaps that really kept Argentina afloat post-pandemic. And when it was broached that Argentina would go out of that deal, it would have meant really a collapse, a financial collapse. The Chinese were very comfortable, even with a guy who'd been slamming them, with extending that deal, and they did extend it.
And the other one insulting the Chinese, quite racially, was Bolsonaro when he was president of Brazil. One of their biggest trading partners, their soya, their beef was going to China in huge amounts, exported by some of the very people, the big landowners, the beef producers who had supported his presidency. Yet there he was insulting their trading partners. They've managed to overcome that. I'm sure words were said in the corridors. Apologies were made to the Chinese, buyers of their produce. But these leaders don't make things easy for trade, either in the United States under Trump, Milei here, or Bolsonaro in Brazil.
I remember doing a story in Santos, which is the major port in the south of Brazil. It's not only known for creating players like Pelé and having great football teams, or soccer, excuse me,
No, football, Joe. Football, Joe. Yeah.
Okay. But it's also a really major port, especially for all the grains, the soy products that are coming out of the south of Brazil. And they had a very antiquated port area. And the Chinese came in and modernized that port. This is back in I think it actually started probably with the military government. And it just kept going and going. And they really installed a beautiful port area, but they also have about 20% for their own use. That's part of the deal. And they take out a ton or tons of product
Yeah.
there right to their
Well, it's a lot of people to feed in China. They want to make sure that those lines remain open. And so Trump, imposing 50% tariffs on Brazilian goods. Why would Brazil keep selling to the United States under these kind of conditions when it has already very good trading links with China? Basically, just I guess you divert your sales to a country you can do business with. Nobody in China would ever make that mistake, I don't think. So again, you've got to ask why. Does Trump know what he's doing? Is he following advice? Is he talking off the top of his head? 50% is, could be crippling to some countries, 50% tariffs, but it might work in Brazil's favor in the long run.
Yeah, it might create new opportunities for Brazilian exporters. We shall see. The other thing about the tariff arrangements, as we've seen in a number of cases, is that Trump makes, he puts August 1st, he's going to put 50% tariffs. August 15th, they're down to 10 again. So you never know how long it's going to last. You don't have any rules to go by. Trump also said he would have 200 deals by August 1st. I believe the last figure I saw was 8 deals. So what can I say? He got 50% of the votes.
We shall watch and wait. We've touched on some eccentric leaders in Latin America. We're going to talk more about that next week, I think, aren't we? About eccentric. We're going to have fun next week. We've got some characters. Let's throw some names out there: Somoza, Bucaram,
To tell some stories.
Carlos Menem. Well, you've met some of these people, haven't you? And it shows itself up more in their sex lives, I think, doesn't it? So their eccentricities. So we'll talk about that next week.
So next week it's going to be sex and politics.
Okay. Well, look forward to it.
Okay.
Speak to you next week, Joe. Take care.
Care.
You too.